To understand what the Dark Mechanicum is, you have to start with what the Adeptus Mechanicus is. The priesthood of Mars, guardians of the machine god, stewards of knowledge so dangerous it has to be wrapped in prayer. They are an empire inside the Imperium, robed in red, speaking in litanies, anointing plasma coils with sacred oils, as if reverence can keep them from exploding. They do not simply build, they sanctify. They do not simply repair, they perform rites of appeasement to the machine spirit. They insist that faith and function are the same thing, and for 10,000 years, the Imperium has let them believe it. Because without their manufactoria and their shipyards, the Imperium dies. That dependence is the first chain. The Dark Mechanicum is what happens when that chain snaps and whips across the face of the galaxy. And in frightened whispers, some Imperials still call it the Dark Mechanicus, as if a softer name will make it less real. During the Horus Heresy, when the War Master's treachery cracked the Great Crusade in half, Mars did not remain whole. The Mechanicum, how they were known in that age, split in a civil war of their own. A Schism of Mars fought in cathedral forges and data vaults, where prayers were replaced with kill code and sanctified chambers filled with the stench of burning circuitry. Some tech priests stayed loyal to the Emperor and to Terra, clinging to the Treaty of Olympus and the idea that order mattered more than ambition. Others looked at the galaxy tearing itself apart and saw opportunity, not tragedy. And under Fabricator General Kelbor Hal, they chose Horus and called it logic. They listened to whispers that came through the static between astropathic screams, and they decided that the strictures of the machine cult were not sacred safeguards, but shackles. When the Loyalists finally bled the traitors out of the Martian forges, what survived did not surrender. It fled into the warp storms, into the Eye of Terror and beyond, carrying stolen schemata and broken oaths like relics pressed to the chest. In Imperial archives, they are heretics, a neat word that tries to make horror manageable. In truth, the Dark Mechanicum is not a single faction with one doctrine and one master. It is an infection of thought that spreads wherever a tech priest decides that the old warnings are merely cowardice. It is a black mirror of Mars. The same hunger for knowledge, the same obsession with the sacred geometry of machines, but with every restraint inverted. Where the Adeptus Mechanicus fears innovation because it might stray into tech heresy, the Dark Mechanicum embraces innovation because heresy is the point. Where the priesthood of Mars speaks of machine spirits as holy mysteries, the Dark Mechanicum dares to ask what those spirits truly are when a vessel screams in the warp and something answers from the other side. And once you start asking that question, you are already too close. They still build cathedrals, but the architecture is wrong, like a hymn played backwards. Their forges, hell forges, inquisitorial dossiers, and Navy action reports call them, when any reports make it back at all, are worlds where daylight is a myth and the sky is a lid of rust. Iron sand crunches beneath servo feet. Promethium burns with a greasy blue-white flame that makes shadows look alive. The air tastes of ozone and hot metal, and behind it all is the wet copper tang of blood. Because flesh is not discarded here the way Mars discards it. Flesh is a component. In the Dark Mechanicum, the phrase, "the flesh is weak," becomes a joke told with a scalpel, because weakness is useful when you can graft it into something stronger. Servitors are still made, but not as punishment or labor alone. They become test beds, stitched together with half-remembered anatomy and warp-tainted code, and if they scream, it is treated as data. A voidsman's account, half drunk and half praying, is more vivid than any dossier. Stating on the year 064 M40, a boarding party cut its way into a drifting transport, expecting plague or pirates, and found the corridors strangely warm, like a throat. The lumen strips flicker in time with a pulse that just simply shouldn't exist. In the engine room, the cogitator banks are not damaged, merely shaped wrong, as if someone had tried to force them into a new posture. The tech adept plugs into a data slate to begin the rite of purity, and the ship answers first, spilling bin-harik across the vox that doesn't sound like numbers anymore, but demonic laughter. The adept freezes, because for a heartbeat, he understands it. The veteran boarding sergeant thankfully had seen this before and put a lasbolt through the tech adept's brain casing. The captain then ordered the derelict obliterated, and anyone who interfaced with the derelict's machine spirit to be executed. The most infamous creation of the Dark Mechanicum is the demon engine, and the name is honest in a way the Imperium rarely is. A demon engine is not simply a tank with spikes. It is a bargain hammered into metal, an unholy contract signed with a welding torch and sealed with a soul. There are different methods, different sects, different levels of blasphemy, but the principle is the same. Take a machine, take a warp entity, and force them into the same skin. The result is a weapon that is never truly dormant, because it is alive in the worst sense of the word. Its pistons twitch like muscles. Its vox grill breathes. Its reactor hums like a throat clearing before it speaks. Those who have faced them describe the sound they make when they charge, part grinding gears, part predatory laughter. And the most frightening part is how the Dark Mechanicum treats that sound as proof of success. How do they do it? Not with a single spell, as if the warp were a door you can open with the right key. The Dark Mechanicum works like its loyal counterpart works, through procedure, iteration, obsession, and ritual. The difference is what they call ritual. They lace systems with scrapcode, corruptive data that infects cogitators like a plague, until even an innocent auspex begins to see lies. On Mars, the oldest warnings name it lingua diabolis, devil language, because it doesn't merely break machines, it teaches them. They carve wards into armor plating, not to protect machine spirits, but to trap what they invite. They chant in bin-harik that stutters into something older, syllables that taste like static and ash, and if the air grows cold while the forge runs hot, they note it down and continue. To them, the warp is not a spiritual danger to avoid. It is an energy source, a laboratory, a raw material. The Imperium calls this madness. The Dark Mechanicum calls it efficiency. Yet the Dark Mechanicum does not float in isolation, tinkering in the dark like a forgotten sect. It is stitched into the broader war of the galaxy, and its clients are the Imperium's worst enemies. Traitor legions and chaos warbands need ammunition, armor, ships, and replacements for war machines that have been fighting since the heresy. Who supplies them when Imperial supply lines are locked behind fortress worlds and blockades? Who repairs a corrupted battle barge that should not still be able to fly? Who dares to maintain Titan legions that walk like gods and kill like storms, their machine spirits long since drowned in hate? Somewhere out there, a forge burns, and the Dark Mechanicum answers, not out of charity, but because every transaction is a chance to learn, to mutate, to improve. Some hell forges are remembered by name, Zana II among them, places that churn out war gear for the long war and call the Emperor the false omnisire with a craftsman's certainty. If a war band pays in slaves, the Dark Mechanicum takes slaves. If it pays in relics, the Dark Mechanicum takes relics. If it pays in secrets, the Dark Mechanicum listens most carefully of all. There is a bitter irony here that the Adeptus Mechanicus would never admit aloud. The loyal priesthood of Mars insists that innovation is dangerous, and so it clings to patterns, templates, and ancient rites, maintaining machines it barely understands, because understanding would require change. The Dark Mechanicum, meanwhile, understands the universe in the way a butcher understands meat, through practice. They do not have the luxury of reverence. Their environment, the warp-churned regions where many of their forges hide, punishes stagnation. The warp storms shift, empires collide, resources vanish, rivals raid. So they adapt, and adaptation becomes a creed. They splice Xenos materials into human designs when it suits them. They weaponize radiation and terror in equal measure. They rebuild the same engine 3 times in 1 week because the first 2 versions were not cruel enough. The cost is not just morality. The cost is identity, because every step toward power is also a step away from anything recognizably human. Not all of them kneel to the ruinous powers in the way a cultist does, sobbing prayers into the dirt. Many Dark Mechanicum sects would laugh at the idea that they are servants of chaos, because they prefer to believe they are scientists. They speak of harnessing and binding and containing, the language of control. But the warp is not a furnace you can safely stoke, and demons are not machine parts you can catalogue. The Dark Mechanicum learns this the way everyone learns it, too late. A forge that begins as a place of cold experimentation becomes a place of devotion by accident, because fear is a kind of worship, and repetition becomes liturgy. A tech priest who swears he will never bow finds that his augmetics twitch when a certain name is spoken, and he cannot explain why. There are rumors, only rumors, passed from voidsman to voidsman in the hush before translation, that some Dark Mechanicum forges have choirs of bound voices built into their walls, and the hymns they sing are not for the machine god. Whether that is truth or superstition hardly matters when the guns start firing.
For the Imperium, the Dark Mechanicum is uniquely terrifying because it attacks the Imperium at its most vulnerable point: dependence. A Space Marine can hold a breach. An Astra Militarum regiment can die on a line and buy time. But what happens when a warship's reactor rights fail because the data prayers have been quietly rewritten? What happens when a Manufactorum servitors turn their tools into weapons because scrapcode has taught them a new purpose? What happens when a venerable tank refuses to start, not because it is broken, but because something inside it is sulking, hungry, and listening to a voice from the void? The Dark Mechanicum wages war the way rust wages war: slow, unseen, and catastrophic. The greatest victories are the ones the victim never understands. And if you think that sounds impossible in a universe where demons claw at reality, remember this: the Imperium is a machine held together by ritual, and the Dark Mechanicum speaks ritual like a native tongue. In the 41st millennium, after the Great Rift tore the galaxy open and the Astronomican's light became uncertain across vast regions, the Dark Mechanicum found new hunting grounds. Isolated worlds, cut off from reinforcement, cling harder to their machines because machines are all they have. That makes them ripe. A single, corrupted data slate can spread like a plague through a city's cogitators. A single, helpful transmission can teach a desperate engineer a rite he should never perform. The temptation is always practical before it becomes spiritual. Fix the generator, restart the void shields, save the hab block. The Dark Mechanicum understands that desperation is the truest lubricant. It makes people do things they would have condemned yesterday, and once you have done it once, the second time feels less like betrayal and more like procedure. Somewhere, a tech adept wipes grease from his hands, whispers a phrase he found in a corrupted archive, and hears something whisper back. And that is the heart of the Dark Mechanicum, stripped of all ornament. It is not merely traitor tech priests building spiked engines for the forces of chaos. It is the idea that knowledge is worth any price, and that control is worth any cruelty, and that the universe is not a place where you should ask whether you ought to do something, only whether you can. The Adeptus Mechanicus fears the past, because the past reminds them how much was lost. The Dark Mechanicum fears nothing, because fear is another tool to be harvested. They build wonders that should not exist, and they do it with hands that no longer tremble.